Good. Okay, today I want to focus on specifically on the 3 weeks, understanding the 3 weeks, understanding what they're all about, understanding how we could overcome the 3 weeks as well. We discussed it a little bit yesterday in our shir, but I want to make something very, very practical, very relevant to our lives. And I think that Chazal actually created the formula of how we can overcome Sinas Chinam. We know, and we mentioned this yesterday, we mentioned this morning in our Gemara shir, that all of the major exiles that Am Yisrael faced throughout all of Jewish history were always because of Sinas Chinam. Were always because of diversity, because of hatred, because people couldn't speak to one another. The truth is, it really starts with Lashon Hara. The first time there was an expulsion was in fact Adam Arishon. He was kicked out of Gan Eden. Why? Because the Nachash, the snake, who uses his tongue in the wrong way, that's what we saw in our Gemara here, he spoke Lashon Hara against HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So the Jewish people were kicked out of Gan Eden. Adam and Chava were kicked out because they listened, they believed the Nachash. But even the exiles, the major exiles that the Jewish people have experienced throughout all of Jewish history, all started because of inappropriate language, because of baseless hatred, because of misunderstanding, because of what seemed to be Lashon Hara. The first one was the first major exile was us going down to Mitzrayim. And the reason why we went down to Mitzrayim, what led up to it, was the fight between Yosef and his son and his brothers. V'lo yachlu ledabro leshalom. He thought he was doing a toelis. He went to speak to his father. They felt it was Lashon Hara. Was it Lashon Hara? Was it not Lashon Hara? But at the end of the day, that was the combination between the two of them, and that's between the Yosef and his brothers, and that's what led to Sinas Chinam. And that's what led to them going down to Mitzrayim. And that separation of the family that couldn't speak shalom with one another, if they would have spoken, the Mefarshim say, it wouldn't have happened. But they stopped speaking. And then they thought that he's saying Lashon Hara. He thought that they hated him. The family got divided. He got sold down, led the entire family to go down into hundreds of years of forced slavery and exile. And then finally we come out, we become a nation, we become a people. And then again, we use our Lashon the wrong way. We speak Lashon Hara against Eretz Yisrael, and there is Chet HaMeraglim, everyone needs to die. Okay, fine, but we're still Zoche to go into Eretz Yisrael. But once we enter Eretz Yisrael, we're able to be together, we're able to build, we build a Mamlacha. David HaMelech becomes the king, Shlomo HaMelech. It's shalom, it's peace, it's beautiful. We're at our peak glory. But then what happens to the next generation? There is a division between Malchus Yisrael and Malchus Yehuda. And since then, the nation is divided for hundreds of years until comes the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash and we go into the first exile because we weren't together. We come back, we built the second Beis HaMikdash, 420 years, and as we saw in the Gemara, Sinas Chinam, the exile that took us out of Mitzrayim entirely. What's going on over here? How do we understand it? How do we overcome Sinas Chinam? How do we do it? That's what I want to discuss with us today. 3 practical steps of how we could do it. And I believe that Rabbi gave us the tools in the 3 weeks and in what the 3 weeks represent and in the names of the 3 Shabbatot of the 3 weeks. How do we call the Shabbos right before Tisha B'Av? What's the name of that Shabbos? We call it Shabbat Chazon. Why is it called Shabbat Chazon? Because if you look at the Navi, how does the Haftorah start? Chazon Yishayahu ben Amotz asher chazal Yehuda v'Yerushalayim b'mei Uziah. And we lane it with the trap of Eicha. Shabbos Chazon always falls out on Parshas Dvar. How do we call this coming Shabbos? Matus Maseh. How do we call last Shabbos? Is there a name for the Shabbos or only Shabbos Chazon? If you look at the Rokeach brings down, he says, Shlosha Shabbatot lifnei Tisha B'Av maftirim, Shabbat Rishona divrei Yirmiyahu, Shniya Shimud Dvar Hashem, Shlishit Chazon Yishayahu, Besiman Dashach. They used to call the 3 weeks Shabbat Divrei, Shabbat Shimu, and Shabbat Chazon. Each one of them represents something else, and I think that each one of them is another step and another tool for us to overcome Sinas Chinam, baseless hatred. Hatred, imagine families, brothers haven't spoken to one another. Friends who got into a fight a long time ago, and now they haven't spoken to one another. Brothers who haven't spoken to one another for over 30 years. There was just a documentary here in Israel. A few friends of mine were on it. It was actually a journey of, it's a journey. There is one family member who was Choser B'Tshuva. It's called Od Nipagesh. It was a great program. All Israelis, one of the family members was Choser B'Tshuva, and the family got disconnected. One of them was for 30 years they didn't speak. One of them was for 10 years. One of them was for 5 years, whatever it was. And then the non-religious brother was willing to go on a journey to meet a frum person to come see his life for a week, and he became his ambassador to sort of help bridge the gap between him and his brother. It was tremendous. It was godless on them that they were willing to go on this journey, and it was godless on the brothers that they were willing to accept one another. But they were able to mend gaps that were there for years. And how many people do we know that they're not talking to one another, to friends, to colleagues, to business partners, to brothers and sisters, to parents, because of something that happened? And whatever happened, it was real. But how do we overcome it? How do we overcome that hatred? And between me and you, a lot of that hatred is Sinat Chinam, is baseless. They think it's based on something, and maybe it was based on something, but it's no longer based on anything. How do we overcome that? So I want to explain how these 3 Shabbatot, with these 3 names, they actually give us the formula of how to overcome any Sinat Chinam that we might be experiencing. And I'm going to start with the one that's closest to Tisha B'Av, because in a certain way, that's the highest, that's the buildup, and that means that's the first thing we need to do, and then we need to do the second thing is this coming Shabbos, and then finally is the third thing, which is the first Shabbos, and that's called Chazon, Shimu, and Divrei. Chazon is the vision, Shimu is the hearing, and Divrei is the speaking. And I think these are the 3 steps that we need to work on. Number 1 is the Chazon. Chazon is how we look at other people. See, there's always 2 things in life. There is the fact of what happened, but then there is the story of how I process it in my mind and what is my interpretation of what just happened. And a lot of times we could switch our interpretation within seconds when we notice it, right? Somebody is promised that he's going to have a meeting, and he doesn't show up on time. And we have stories in our head. He never shows up on time. He doesn't care about me. He doesn't respect me. And we're upset. And I'm never going to talk to that person again, whatever it might be. And then we hear the facts later on, and we say that the fact is that he didn't show up. That's the fact. How do we interpret it is in our mind. And then later on, we find that, oh, he got into a car accident, chas v'shalom. And then we're like, oh, I'm so sorry. I feel so bad. And I want to help. And I wanted this. And he's such a good friend. So the same thing that we interpreted in a negative way, we now interpret in a positive way. And sometimes the facts don't even change. It's not that we need to clarify more facts. Sometimes we just need to understand the facts better. Sometimes even if we don't understand the facts any different, it really all depends on our preconceived notion. And that's really how Tisha B'Av actually even started. We mentioned this, that the Meraglim came into Eretz Yisrael. That was the first time that we actually have Tisha B'Av. They came back on Tisha B'Av and they said the bad news. And if you look at Megillas Eicha, it's all written in Aleph Beis. Eicha Yashva Badad, Bachot Tivcha Balayla, Galsa Yehuda Moni. Aleph Beis, every single chapter is written in the Aleph Beis. But if you look, you'll notice that the ayin and the pei are out of order in the 2nd chapter and in the 3rd chapter. Why are they out of order? Why is the ayin and the pei out of order? And says the Gemara in Sanhedrin, Patsu alecha PM. Why is the pei before the ayin? Normally, alphabetical order, you put the ayin before the pei because ayin represents the eye, the ayin, and pei represents the mouth. And the Meraglim, they spoke with their peh, with their mouth, before they saw with their eye. That's what the Gemara in Sanhedrin Daf Kuf Dalet explains. And that was the sin of the Meraglim. And Yirmiyahu Navi, when he wanted to lament the destruction of Yerushalayim, he's writing that as a hint by putting the letter pei before the letter ayin, so that we understand that that is the source of the sin of the Meraglim, and that's the source of any Sinat Chinam, and that's what brought us to the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash in the first temple and in the second. What does it mean that they spoke with their mouth before they saw their eye? Didn't they go into Eretz Yisrael and then they saw and then they came back and gave the report? What does it mean? It means that they had already decided what they wanted to see. They already decided, as the Zohar brought down in the Mesilas Yesharim, Parak Yud Aleph, they already decided that they don't want to go into Eretz Yisrael for whatever reason, for good reason. Let's say it was for good reason. They wanted to stay basking in the glory of Hashem. They wanted to eat the man, to learn Torah from Moshe Rabbeinu. They had good intentions and they decided not to want to go into Eretz Yisrael. So everything they saw was negative. What did they see? They saw people dying. They saw cities were fortified. They saw huge fruits. Now, Rashi explains to us, why were people dying? Because Hashem was trying to look out for them and was trying to keep everyone occupied so that they could walk without any issue. The cities were fortified because everyone is scared. The fruits are huge because this land is full of blessing. But they looked at everything in a warped way because they didn't want to go in. Right? The nations of the world do this to us all the time. They look at Jews in a negative way. It doesn't matter what we do. They're always looking at us in a negative way. Look at what they did. Well, you'll find the cure for coronavirus. And the people who hate us will say, oh, they spread the virus so that they could find the cure, so that they could become rich. Right? They're going to warp everything out of order. Because if you choose to see negativity, you will see negativity. If you choose to see the good, so then whatever is happening around you, you're like, wow, God is so kind to me. He's looking out for me. He's doing so many miracles for me. The same thing could happen, but it's based on our chazon, on our vision, on our eye. Do we allow our eye to actually see what's going on around us? And it's not just situations around us, it's also people around us. How many times do we see a family that is walking outside and we're like, look at those parents. Where is the chinuch in that? Look at that kid over there. Now, it's usually somebody that we may not identify with. If we know the kid, if we know the family, so then we're like, oh, what's going on over there? Something must have happened. Or let's go help him out. We won't look necessarily in a negative, judgmental eye. A lot of it depends on our preconceived notion. Does that person look like me? Is he somebody that I would normally identify with, part of my community? So then I'm, okay, I'll look at him positive. But if it's somebody from a different community, a different color of skin, a different Havara in his miftah, or a different, he's French, so we're like, oh, look at them. Now, why is that? Because we choose to see what we want to see, the stories we've been telling ourselves. It makes sense if everything aligns. It throws us out of order if it doesn't make sense, right? How many times do we interact with somebody, right? This happens to me all the time. I interact with people from the wider Israeli audience, which are amazing. And you interact with somebody, and he's for the first time having a deep conversation with a frum Orthodox Jew, let alone a rabbi. And he's saying, you know what, you're different than any other frum Jew that I've ever met. I'm like, well, how many other frum Jews have you met? And he hasn't really met anyone. He just saw them through the media or from the far window, and through the stories that are told to him in the media. Whenever he sees something, he interprets that that's what's happening. And when he finally has a conversation, so then he's excited because it's a conversation about values and about meaning. It's true. No one is perfect. No community is perfect. No society is perfect. Every single sector of the Jewish population and in the world has a lot of people with negative, we'll call them the shulayim, the fringes. There are people who have family issues, who have abuse issues, which are ganavim. Every single community, every single part of society has that. The question is, what are we focusing on? What's our chazon? So step number one of overcoming Sinat Chinam is allowing ourselves during these 3 weeks to truly look at situations in an objective eye. And in fact, in order for us to see things with an objective eye, we need to train ourselves to be dan l'chav schos at any given situation, to try to see the good in any situation, and then figure out the facts and if there's something negative happening or not. But always try to find the good in the situation. Chazon. What's your vision like? What are you choosing to see? It's up to you to choose to see. Now, we can't be blind. We can't ignore if there's something negative going on. and we need to be realistic. However, many, many times, all of the issues of Sinat Chinam are because we already had a preconceived notion in our mind. We had a story, and we're going with that story, even though we have no reason to back it up. That's number one. Number two is the AFT Aura of this week's Shabbos. Starts off with the word Shimu. Shimu Dvar Hashem Beis Yehuda. Shimu Dvar Hashem. The second thing is learning how to listen to somebody else. If you're able to see the person in an objective eye and be willing to see the positivity and the good attributes of that person, you're now able to try to listen to what he actually has to say. A lot of times when we look at somebody and he's different than us, we don't want to listen. What could he possibly teach me? I have nothing to learn from him. He's so-and-so, he's like that. Shimu means learn to be a listener. Now, what does it mean to be a listener? Listening doesn't mean hearing. It's not that I hear what you're saying. It's that I actively listen. Beis Hillel, where the halacha is like Beis Hillel. You know why the halacha is like Beis Hillel? Because Beis Hillel, when they argued with Beis Shammai, says the Gemara, that they used to repeat the words of Beis Shammai before they said their own opinion. Meaning when you're arguing with somebody, and you're allowed to argue with people, when you're arguing with somebody, you're first of all accepting him to be a person, and therefore you're looking at him. And you're like, I see you, and I want to hear what you have to say. Now, in order for me to even argue on you, I'm able to repeat. Let me just get this straight. I'm able to repeat what you said. You know what that does? That values the other person, that makes him feel chashuv, that makes him feel like you appreciated what he had to say. And now you're even allowed to argue on him. And you could say, I don't agree with your hashkafa. I don't agree with your opinion. I don't agree with what you said. I don't agree that's what we should be doing. And let me explain to you why. But we're now talking to one another, all because I was an active listener, all because I was willing to actually listen. And I'll tell you a secret. If you have a fight with somebody, go ahead and listen to him. Listen to what he has to say. Rabbi Wein just quoted to me last Shabbos from Rabbi Yisrael Salanter. He said, how does the pasuk go? Bekamim alai mireim tishmana oznai. Bekamim alai mireim, when my enemies come up and they speak to me and they shout at me. Halavai tishmana oznai, let my ears listen to what my enemies have to say about me. What a maila. What a level. When you're being screamed at, when someone is telling you, you know what, you're not doing this well. You're not doing well. Rabbi, your drush is too long. It's too short. It's not enough. It's too much. Because you get comments on both sides that sometimes are contradictory. But you have to listen. You have to listen because there's something that we can learn from people who have a comment against us. Sometimes we're driving and somebody has what to say. You know, well, you're standing in my spot. You're this. We right away react. We get defensive. But maybe they have what to say. Maybe we are standing in their spot. Maybe we did cut them off. Maybe we did try to cut it. Bekamim alai mireim, when my enemies come up against me, tishmana oznai, let my ears hear. He was taking the word as reim, as ra, people who are trying to be meira and do evil to me. Let my ear hear it. That's our second avoda, is to be willing to listen even to people who are contradicting us and fighting against us, and that we have a machlokes with them. And then number three is the parsha that we just read, the AFT Aura, which is called Divrei Yirmiyahu ben Chilkiah min HaKohanim. It's the speech. How are we going to talk to one another? A lot of times when there's a fight, we end up not talking. And sometimes, very common with your friend, with a spouse, the talking goes into quiet mode for a day, for a few hours. The men go into their caves, whatever might happen. But then there has to come a stage where you're willing to talk. The worst thing is if you're not willing to talk to the other side, the side that you're fighting with, right? The problem with Yosef, why we went down into exile, was velo yachlu echav ledabro leshalom. His brothers couldn't speak to him. they couldn't have a normal conversation with him. And I've seen this with people, and I've had, people told me they're roommates. And whenever this person would come into the room, I would just get up and leave because I had a hard time being in the same room with them. You need to be able to speak to the other person, to put things on the table, even though it's hard to have a conversation. And if you know how to listen, so then you have to keep on talking to one another, even though we're arguing, even though we feel different about one another. If we have an issue with somebody and we're not articulating it to him and we're not saying it out in the open, so then he doesn't even know that there's an issue. He just feels that there's a distance, right? I've had my share of people that had issues with me in my life, even in the rabbinate. I've had people who've sent me an email or called me up, and I was so appreciative if somebody wanted to say something, Rabbi, I'm not expecting now a flood of issues that people have with me, but I've had people say, oh, I have this issue, or what about that? And I appreciate if somebody, specifically if it's an issue that maybe I said something inappropriately. I mean, Baruch Hashem, it's very few, but whenever it was, I actually appreciated it. I felt like it was coming from people who cared. It was done in a respectful manner. And in fact, it brought me closer to people because we were able to have an open conversation. If I made a mistake, I'm able to apologize that I made a mistake. And if I didn't, if I felt I had reason why I said something a certain way, so then I would say I said it a certain way because this is what I felt, this is what I believe, and this is what I stand to. Let me explain my side. And I hear your side. And then it was a real conversation. And then we understood one another. It's so important to learn to keep on talking when you have a fight with somebody else. On that show that I quoted, it was two brothers who haven't spoken for 30 years. Can you imagine? 30 years. What are we waiting for? We're waiting for the last moments. We're waiting for somebody, chas v'shalom, on his deathbed to call up his brother to say, you know what, you're part of my life. To say words and to say thank you and to ask for forgiveness, things that we could have said in our lifetime. We're waiting for the end in order to say those things. Why? Why are we not saying them right now? And that's what these 3 weeks are all about. If you have a fight with anybody in your life, whether it's a family member, a friend, a colleague, and you haven't spoken in a while, and there is a rip between you two, number one, the first thing you need to do is try to re-look at the situation. Do not look at the situation with negative eyes. Try to understand what the fact was, understand that you had a story, how to process it, and that's why you got into this fight. Try to look at it in a totally different story. Try to say, if I was him, how did he look at the situation that happened? With real objective eyes. If you could imagine what he saw happen, and you put yourself into his shoes, and your chazon, your vision, is from his point of view, you'll already have a different point of view. And now you're willing to listen, and you're willing to talk to him. Call him up, have a conversation, tell him, we've been fighting for a long time. I don't want to fight anymore. I want to hear what you have to say. I even tried to see it from your side, and I understand that maybe I made a mistake. I want to explain what I have to say. I want to hear what you have to say. I'm willing to have a conversation. I'm an active listener. I care about your opinion. And I'm willing to talk. In fact, I'm not willing to give up not talking. Because we could argue and we could fight, but our relationship is important to me, and therefore I want to keep on talking. This is what these 3 weeks are all about. If you're having a conflict with somebody and you've been fighting and you haven't spoken to them in a long time, these are the times, these are the 2 weeks that we have left to actually try to mend that relationship. And there's no better time than during this coronavirus. You say, Hashem has thrown this on the world, not so that we could keep on going with our mistakes, that we could keep on being separated from one another. We're living through extraordinary times, and we need to be extraordinary, and we need to break through this, and we need to break through our negative midos that are holding us back from mending our relationship. And we need to say we're sorry, and we need to hear the other person, and we may not fully agree with them, but we're still going to keep on talking, and we're going to slowly but surely mend that relationship and break the Sinat Chinam cycle, because that's what these weeks are all about. And that's what will bring us towards Tisha B'Av, hopefully not sitting on the floor, but rather rejoicing in the Beis HaMikdash. And it's a really hard avoda. And many people have very complicated conflicts in their families and in their relationships. And it takes a lot of sensitivity to do it. But this is a zman mesugo. This is a time that is extraordinary, that gives us the ability to mend our relationships. And I want to give us all a bracha that will be zocha to follow these 3 steps of chazon, of looking at somebody in an appropriate way, of shimu, of being willing to listen to them and actively listening and be able to repeat over what they said and what their opinion is. And then divrei is to keep on talking, to be willing to keep on talking, to talk appropriately, to say the right words, to watch our lashon, to not speak lashon hara, to use our ability of speech to connect, to build, to empower, to complement one another, and not chas v'shalom, to put each other down. Okay, I want to wish everyone bracha v'atzlacha on this.